Hey guys, it's Ellen Brock, novel editor. I hope you're all doing really well. In the last video, we talked about 5 ways to write better descriptions. Today, we are going to talk about 5 more ways to write better descriptions. I am going to build a little bit on that previous video, so if you didn't see part 1, I'll put a link in the description. It would be helpful to watch that first. Number 1, group descriptions of the same thing together. Sometimes writers, especially in early drafts, can write their description sort of stream of consciousness. So as they think of them, they write them down. So they aren't necessarily organized or they may not flow logically. For example, we might describe object A and then move on to object B and then back to object A and then on to object C and then back to B. And it can create this sort of jumbled, chaotic feeling to the description. It's one thing to break up descriptions with action or dialogue, which can help to sort of give the reader a break from the descriptions. It's another thing entirely to break up descriptions with other descriptions. For example, Abby stood at the white gate in front of the little house. On the other side of the gate was a cobblestone walkway that cut through a lush garden. The wind picked up her hair and flipped it back off her shoulders. The house was short, only one story, but it had large square windows. The sky was blue and the birds sang as she looked at the house. Through the large windows, most of the interior was visible even from the gate. The house was cozy, quaint, perfect. The long-stemmed flowers swayed in the breeze. Through one window there was a fireplace and an easy chair, through the other an old black stove and wooden dinner table. The sun glittered off the dew on the flowers' petals. The garden was like a patchwork blanket laid out in front of the house. This description feels disjointed and a little sloppy because there's no apparent organization of the information. It jumps all around and the details feel jumbled up. When we describe one thing, for example the house, at 2 or more points within the same description rather than all at once, we are forcing the reader's mind to zip around. It's like telling the reader, look at the house, now look at the garden, now look at the character, now back to the house, now up to the sky, now back to the house, now back to the garden. This gives the reader mental whiplash, which makes it a lot harder to create a cohesive image of what's being described, reduces retention, and just isn't very pleasant to read. We can improve the organization, comprehension, and flow of this passage by collecting descriptions of the same things together. There are 2 categories that feel pretty obvious, the house and the garden. These make up the bulk of the details in this paragraph. This gives us a simple organization method, 1 paragraph about the house and 1 paragraph about the garden. If all we do is take the sentences and separate them into those 2 categories, we end up with, Abby stood at the white gate in front of the little house. The house was short, only 1 story, but it had large square windows. Through the large windows, most of the interior was visible even from the gate. The house was cozy, quaint, perfect. Through one window there was a fireplace and an easy chair, through the other an old black stove and wooden dinner table. On the other side of the gate was a cobblestone walkway that cut through a lush garden. The long-stemmed flowers swayed in the breeze. The sun glittered off the dew on the flowers' petals. The garden was like a patchwork blanket laid out in front of the house. While this passage still isn't perfect, we can already see a huge improvement in logical flow, and it's much easier now to visualize this house and garden. I did remove 2 sentences from the original description. The wind picked up her hair and flipped it back off her shoulders, and the sky was blue and the birds sang as she looked at the house. Neither of these feel essential to me. While we could attempt to integrate them into the description, they are more incidental and less about the house and garden specifically. So I'd rather see these described separately at a different point in the scene if they're truly needed. Now, this new description is still a little clunky, so let's clean it up a bit more. The sentence, the house was cozy, quaint, perfect, feels like a conclusion or a thesis statement that sums up the entire description. So it would probably work best either at the beginning or end of the description of the house. However, if we really think about it, cozy, quaint, perfect also sums up the description of the garden, and so maybe we want to rework it slightly from the house was cozy, quaint, perfect to everything was so cozy, quaint, perfect, so that we can put it at the very end of our description as the overall intended message of the passage. Of course, we can't always group all descriptions together. Sometimes, for example, we might need to describe something multiple times because maybe it's seen from a distance once and then up close, or maybe the character sees it once and then it doesn't have any relevance to them and then it becomes relevant. So when they see it again, they are more interested in it. They focus more clearly on details where previously they just gave it sort of a cursory glance or a general description. We might also want to have certain pervasive descriptions. For example, maybe the weather, you want to describe it multiple times so that it feels consistently relevant. Pain or an injury might also fall into that category where you might want to describe it here and there throughout because you don't want the reader to forget that it's something the character is dealing with. But in cases where we pause the action to provide a description, it's better if we can cluster descriptions of the same thing together. In the majority of cases, this is going to create a smoother flow, a more logical flow, and it's just going to make it easier for the reader to understand and comprehend what you are writing. Number 2, avoid repeating distinct adjectives. So this is a really easy problem to fix, but I think it's something worth being aware of. Most writers tend to have adjectives that they particularly favor, sort of pet adjectives that come up a lot in their writing. Normally, this isn't a major problem because most adjectives are sort of generic. So, for example, readers probably aren't going to notice if you reuse the word red a lot. If a lot of things in your book are red, probably no one's going to particularly notice or particularly care. They might notice if everything of the same object is red. For example, if every shirt is red, everyone in the entire book seems to be always wearing a red shirt. Readers are probably going to notice that at some point, and they may find that slightly odd. But they're way more likely to notice a more distinct adjective, like, for example, crimson. If a dress is crimson and a man's wearing a crimson shirt and someone bleeds crimson blood and someone has a crimson rose, it starts to really stand out to the reader. It's a lot more distinct. And the reason that we want to avoid that is because it pulls a lot of attention to the writer. And you might have experienced this before yourself, where maybe you read a short story or a novel and a particular adjective was used unusually frequently. I think I've seen this happen with acrid in particular, where sometimes it seems that certain writers will overuse the word acrid. And it just comes up a lot, and it really does stand out, and you notice it, and you might even sort of make fun of them for it at a certain point because it sort of starts to seem silly, but mainly it's because it just pulls so much attention to the writer. And we don't actually want to pull a lot of attention onto ourselves as writers. We want our stories to sort of come alive so that the reader can be immersed in them and feel that they're experiencing something that feels real. We don't want the reader constantly thinking about the writer and, well, why did the writer choose this word, or why does the writer keep using this same word over and over again? So I would encourage you not to worry about this while actually writing, because when you're writing, you want to sort of get into the flow. You want to be able to just have the words, come out smoothly. You don't want to be stopping and starting every few sentences because you're worried that you already used an adjective. You can fix this in editing, and I would recommend just fully ignoring the entire concept while writing, especially writing the first draft. But when editing, you might take distinct words and search your document. So you can use the find feature or tool in your word processor to see if you've repeated a really distinct adjective elsewhere. Or you can also ask your critique partner or your beta readers if they noticed any words that seemed oddly distinct that they felt like stood out to them. And sometimes this can happen even if it's not repeated. Sometimes a certain adjective might just sound too specific or too fancy for the general style, and it might stand out even if it wasn't repeated. But beta readers and critique partners can be really good at identifying that. So don't worry about repeating common everyday adjectives. Lots of things are big, lots of things are small, lots of things are green, lots of things are red. But try to limit really distinct adjectives like musty, crimson, vermilion, acrid. Those things just really stand out. Number 3, use descriptions to express characterization. Often we think about characterization as something that comes across primarily in introspection, but descriptions are a great place to provide some characterization and have the characterization impact the narration so you can create more voice. So, for example, what your character wants, their goals, their motives, their flaws, all of the things going on in their life and all of the aspects of their personality are going to impact how they perceive things in their environment. For example, one character might see a luxury car and they're having financial problems, and they might think it's so frivolous, it's so unfair, I can't even pay my rent. Why do they get this luxury car? Another character might see the luxury car and they're trying to impress a girl, and they might think, oh, this is what I need in order to impress the girl. If I had a luxury car, that girl would be interested in me. So what's going on in your character's life is going to impact how they perceive the things in their environment. And this is going to help your descriptions to be sort of working double time for you, because instead of needing to entirely have characterization as one aspect and descriptions as a different aspect of your writing, you can blend them together and create a stronger voice and a more interesting character. And in that way, the character will feel as if they're consistently impacting the story. They're impacting the way the story is being told, not just impacting where the scenes go and not just directing the plot, but also their personalities and the things they long for and the things that they want and their flaws and all that have a consistent and pervasive impact on the story. Let's look at an example from White Oleander by Janet Fitch. In this scene, the protagonist has just arrived at a new foster home. She sat down with Joan, who opened my file, but she kept smiling at me too much, like she was worried what I'd think of her in her home. I wished I could tell her she had nothing to worry about. I went into the kitchen. It was small, tiled red and white, with a pearly top table and chrome chairs, a real Leave It to Beaver kitchen, decorated with a salt and pepper shaker collection, Betty Boops and porcelain cows and sets of cacti. It was a kitchen to drink cocoa in, to play checkers. I was afraid of how much I wanted this. I walked out into the small backyard, bright with wide flower beds and pots on a wooden deck, a weeping Chinese elm. There was a flying goose windmill, and red poinsettia grew against the house's white wall in the sun. Kitsch, I heard my mother's voice in my ear, but it wasn't. It was charming. Claire Richards was charming. With her wide love-me smile, her bedroom, which backed up to the deck through open French doors, was charming. The quilt on the low pine doubled bed, the armoire, the hope chest, and the rag rug. This is a great example of integrating descriptions with character motivation. We have a character who really wants stability and views what her mother might view as kitsch as charming. This tells us so much about what this house looks like and about the protagonist. The author could have separated these concepts using introspection to bring across directly or overtly that the protagonist wants a stable and homey life, but expressing this through the description of the house feels so much more natural. Here's another example, this time from Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. The tropical rain fell in drenching sheets, hammering the corrugated roof of the clinic building, roaring down the metal gutters, splashing on the ground in a torrent. Roberta Carter sighed and stared out the window. From the clinic, she could hardly see the beach or the ocean beyond, cloaked in low fog. This wasn't what she had expected when she had come to the fishing village of Bahia Inesco on the west coast of Costa Rica to spend 2 months as a visiting physician. Bobby Carter had expected sun and relaxation after 2 grueling years of residency in emergency medicine at Michael Reese in Chicago. She had been in Bahia Inesco now for 3 weeks, and it had rained every day. The description of the rain serves a functional purpose in that it gives us the location details which are important to understanding the story. It also adds some sensory information which is nice, but the meaning to the character, she expected sun and relaxation and has spent the last 3 weeks in the rain, gives us an emotional reason to care about the description, bringing it to life. It's telling us why this description matters and how it integrates into the character's life and goals. Of course, every single description is not going to have a significant point or a major element of characterization. Sometimes we don't want that because we don't want to pull a lot of attention onto something. If the character has a lot of thoughts or feelings about it, it may put more attention on it than you want. It may emphasize something you don't want to emphasize. So we always have to consider balance, and that sometimes we really don't want to pull too much attention onto a description because it's just meant to provide a basic visual, or it's just there because more or less it has to be. But anytime we're going to pause for a really long description, anytime we're going to describe something really in depth, it can be helpful to add some elements of characterization to better integrate that description into the scene or into the story as a whole, so that it doesn't feel like we just hit the pause button to dump a bunch of information, and so that you can take advantage of an opportunity to portray some characterization. Number 4, choose meaningful adjectives. If you've read any novels ever, really, you will know that adjectives are used pretty frequently by pretty much every writer. There are some exceptions, but most writers use adjectives pretty regularly. That said, you absolutely can overuse adjectives, or you can use the wrong adjectives that are detracting instead of adding to your description. Usually this is because many amateur writers will feel almost like a compulsive need to add an adjective in front of every single noun. For example, this type of paragraph is fairly common in amateur writing. The black cat walked down the spooky lane and pawed at the oak door of the red house. The tall man opened the large door and leaned out his bald head. The adjective before every single noun creates a very oddly monotonous feel to the writing, and it can also make writing feel as if it's intended for children, even if it isn't. Let's compare this to an example from a published novel. This is an excerpt from Darkly Dreaming Dexter by Jeff Lindsay. By 6:30, I was home in my Coconut Grove apartment. I took the slide from my pocket, a simple clean glass strip with a careful single drop of the priest's blood preserved in the center. Nice and clean, dry now, ready to slip under my microscope when I wanted to remember. I put the slide with the others, 36 neat and careful, very dry drops of blood. I took an extra long shower, letting the hot water wash away the last of the tension and ease the knots in my muscles, scrubbing off the small final traces of clinging smell from the priest in the garden of the little house in the swamp. While there are a fair amount of adjectives in these paragraphs, the sound and flow is still quite nice and the writing still feels professional. The author avoids the clunky, repetitive sound of putting adjectives in front of every single noun, but still uses a good number of adjectives throughout the description. There is even quite a bit of repetition of adjectives. For example, the first paragraph has 2 instances of clean and 2 instances of dry. Part of how the author avoids an overly redundant sound despite the fairly heavy use and repetition of adjectives is changing how they are positioned in the sentence. They aren't always placed right before the noun in the way we traditionally think of adjectives. For example, in the first instance of clean, its placement is before the noun, clean glass strip, but in the second instance, the adjective does not appear before the noun, nice and clean, dry now, ready to slip under my microscope when I wanted to remember. Likewise, the dry in this sentence is repeated later, but that time it does appear right before the noun, dry drops of blood. This adds some nice variation. Also note how many nouns have no adjectives at all. This is also an important part of creating a cleaner, nicer sound. But simply cutting out adjectives isn't the whole story because we need to know which adjectives to cut, which ones are irrelevant. To do that, we need to build on 2 concepts that we talked about previously. The first is that if you try to bring across an image that's in your head to the reader exactly as you imagine it, so you just want the reader to see exactly what you are seeing, you are way more likely to overuse adjectives because you have this very precise idea of what every aspect looks like in a scene, in an environment, of clothes, of a person's face, etc. And when you want to portray that exact image, you're going to over-describe. The second thing is that we want to have our descriptions pointing in a direction that's cohesive. So we want all of the descriptions to sort of be creating a certain vibe, a certain tone, or an idea about what's being described so that it feels as if everything's pointing to one cohesive interpretation. And very rarely is there an adjective we can put in front of every single noun that's going to enhance that point or that message, or that's even going to feel relevant to the point or message that we're trying to bring across. Let's look again at the example from Darkly Dreaming Dexter. If we think about the purpose of these 2 paragraphs, what they are meant to convey, we can see that they are presenting the overall point or idea that Dexter is extremely meticulous. A writer not focusing on the overall point of the paragraph, purely focusing on the images and other sensory information in their own mind, might feel the need to add additional adjectives. For example, some writers might feel compelled to rewrite, letting the hot water wash away the last of the tension and ease the knots in my muscles, with more adjectives, letting the hot water wash away the last of the horrible tension and ease the painful knots in my cramped muscles. Aside from the fact that this creates an awkwardly repetitive rhythm, the additional adjectives disrupt the emphasis by creating a new emphasis, his pain and soreness. If we focus on the point of the paragraph depicting Dexter as meticulous, it's easier to see why emphasizing his soreness isn't desirable or necessary. It would merely pull attention from the actual point of the shower, not easing his muscles, but meticulously removing the last traces of what he's done. When we focus on the point of the description, we can determine which adjectives are pulling attention towards the point and which are pulling attention away from the point. Here's another example, this time from I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Once the room had been warmly decorated, but that was in another time. Now it was a room entirely functional, and since Neville's bed and bureau took up so little space, he had converted one side of the room into a shop. A long bench covered almost an entire wall, and its hardwood top, a heavy bandsaw, a wood lathe, an emery wheel, and a vise. Above it, on the wall, were haphazard racks of the tools that Robert Neville used. He took a hammer from the bench and picked out a few nails from one of the disordered bins. Aside from conveying the visuals, the overall point or message of this paragraph is that what was once a warmly decorated room when his wife was alive is now the total opposite. Being stingier with the adjectives helps to emphasize this underlying message. For example, once the room had been warmly decorated, back when his wife was alive, is intentionally contrasted by the adjectives functional, haphazard, and disordered, which is the total opposite of warmly decorated. Again, an amateur writer might be tempted to add additional unnecessary adjectives. Instead of Neville's bed and bureau took up so little space he had converted one side of the room into a shop, an amateur writer might be tempted to write something closer to Neville's soft bed and wooden bureau took up so little space he had converted one side of the small room into a woodworking shop. The extra adjectives soft bed and wooden bureau and woodworking shop don't give us additional details that actually matter or feel relevant. In fact, when we add these extra adjectives, we're diluting the point and perhaps even undermining it. Soft is an easy enough description of the bed, but it actually sounds warm and homey, and the point is that the room no longer feels warm and homey without his wife, so this gives the wrong impression. Throwing in extra adjectives can actually muddy or confuse the point and make it difficult to pick up on important information. Alternatively, writers might feel the need to overemphasize the smallness of his furniture by writing Neville's little bed and tiny bureau took up so little space he had converted one side of the room into a shop. This has the same problem, only this time the additions little bed and tiny bureau unnecessarily emphasize the smallness of the room, which again isn't the point. So being stingy with our adjectives is helpful, not because adjectives are fundamentally bad, but because we want to create a cohesive overall idea or message about what we're describing. And when we limit the amount of adjectives we're using, or when we're just very careful about the adjectives we're using to make sure that they are conveying that message in the best possible way, we are going to end up with a much better description and overall better scenes, better chapters, better writing in general. Number 5, describe things in order of importance. So for some writers, this might come naturally or might just seem very obvious. For other people, it might be something you've just never thought of before. But people tend to notice things in particular orders. So we tend to notice things that are more immediate or urgent before things that are less immediate or less urgent. For example, if we go into a room, we're more likely to notice something that's different or out of place from the last time we were in the room, rather than our attention being drawn to, say, the pattern on the sofa that we've seen 100 times. We're also way more likely to notice intense sounds or smells or sensations like pain way before we're going to notice something mundane like the color of somebody's shirt or the color of their eyes. We're also way more likely to notice a person or a figure in a room before any other aspect of the room whatsoever. So that will be the first thing that we tend to notice when we enter a room, is who's in this room, because that's what people naturally do. And the reason that this is important is because readers want to feel immersed in the story, and they want to feel as if this is something that's really happening and really unfolding in front of them. And when descriptions are out of order or outside of the natural order that we would normally perceive something, so for example, maybe you describe the color of a character's eyes before you describe blood splatter on the floor, it feels very odd, and it breaks that feeling of immersion. It makes it harder for the reader to feel like this is something true that's really unfolding in front of them. For this reason, we might find this passage to be awkward and unnatural. Tom pushed open the front door and entered the silent house. The little front room was quaintly decorated, a stack of quilts in the corner, old upholstered armchairs scattered here and there, a handmade rag rug. A tall man stood in the center of the room, staring at him. Unless we're being comedic or ironic, it feels extremely awkward to not describe a person in the room until after describing the furniture. The reason this feels unnatural is because it seems to suggest that the character's attention went to the furniture first and this person second, which just doesn't reflect the way we notice things in reality, making it harder for the reader to suspend disbelief. Of course, the order that a character notices something is also going to be influenced by their psychological state. If someone's sort of sneaking around, maybe they're hiding from someone, they're going to be hyper alert to sounds. They're going to hear every little tiny sound around them. If someone's, say, sightseeing, they might be more hyper alert to visual details than normal. They might notice the colors of the window frames and the roofs and things that normally we wouldn't necessarily pay that much attention to. So the psychological state is going to have a big impact, and we do have to think about what's going on for the character, because it's not always as black and white, or we can't just give a really specific order in which things are always going to be noticed, because our psychology is also going to influence that. Take, for example, this excerpt from I Am Legend, in which the protagonist is going to visit his wife's crypt. If you're not familiar with the story, there are sort of zombie vampire type creatures, which is what he's worried about in this passage. Drawing closer to the crypt, he stiffened as he noticed that the iron door was slightly ajar. Here we have something that is out of place, the iron door being ajar, which is logically going to be noticed first. Notice the author doesn't stop here to describe the appearance of the crypt. It wouldn't be significant to the character, and to pause to describe the look of the crypt would feel unnatural because it would go against the character's psychological state, which is more urgent and worried since he just noticed that this door is ajar. Oh no, he thought. He broke into a run across the wet grass. If they've been at her, I'll burn down the city, he vowed. I swear to God, I'll burn it to the ground if they've touched her. He flung open the door and it clanged against the marble wall with a hollow, echoing sound. So next we have a loud sound, which understandably pulls attention. But again, we don't stop to describe detailed visuals. The author did sneak marble in here to give us something clearer to visualize, but it doesn't slow us down. His eyes moved quickly to the marble base on which the sealed casket rested. His attention immediately goes to the most important thing to him in this moment, the place where his wife's body is supposed to be resting. The second it's within view, it's what he looks at, and it is the only visual thing described. The tension sank. He drew in breath again. It was still there, untouched. Then, as he started in, he saw the man lying in one corner of the crypt, body curled up on the cold floor. So next he notices a figure in the crypt. Even though normally we would notice a figure before anything else, we know from reading this that his wife's body being untouched is so important to him that it pulls all of his focus, even overriding the more natural order of attention, which would be to notice the figure first. With a grunt of rage, Robert Neville rushed at the body, and grabbing the man's coat in taut fingers, he dragged him across the floor and flung him violently out onto the grass. The body rolled onto its back, the white face pointing at the sky. Here, Robert addresses the threat at hand. He doesn't stop for a lot of unnecessary descriptions. We do get taut fingers and white face, but again, it's not intrusive and doesn't slow down the action. He's not noticing here the type of grass or the color of the man's coat. Those are not the significant details of this moment. Robert Neville went back into the crypt, chest rising and falling with harsh movements. Then he closed his eyes and stood with his palms resting on the cover of the casket. I'm here, he thought. I'm back. Remember me. He threw out the flowers he'd brought the time before and cleared away the few leaves that had blown in because the door had been opened. Now that things have calmed down, we get details that didn't matter when he first entered the crypt out of fear. The flowers from last time and the leaves that had blown into the crypt. If these things had been described while he was anxious about his wife's body or while attacking the man in the crypt, it would have felt very odd for attention to be pulled to details that would seem insignificant in that moment. Writing our descriptions in an order that's very close to how people would naturally notice things in their environment will really help to keep the reader immersed, and it will feel a lot more natural, and the flow will just feel a lot better, a lot cleaner and nicer. So that is all for descriptions. I really hope you found this video and the previous video helpful. If you have any questions about descriptions or any of your own tips about descriptions, please leave them in the comments. A cheat sheet will go up on Patreon at the $5 and up tier with all 10 of these tips. So if you want to help support the channel, or if you're already supporting the channel, you can get that cheat sheet. I will be back with a new video in the near future. And in the meantime, happy writing, guys.